As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just
You're
gotta
listening
get
to the
up,
Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and it's a good morning here in the North America. I was talking to a friend this morning who is undergoing proton therapy for prostate, and as you may know, we've done a few shows on prostate, and it was just interesting to chat with him because these issues of morbidity and survival and thrival are with us for a while. And the shows that we've done with the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation and in partnership with the cultural ambassadors to the Yale Clinical Research Program is, in my mind, have been just so instrumental about what does it mean about taking ownership of your health and your family's health and your community's health. And it's not just a mantra or a phrase, but we can really be proactive and we can be agents of change. You hear that word so often, agents of change. And what does it mean? But it's just making history rather than history being made about you or even after you've left. And today, really I love the title of today's show, Live Better, Live Better, comparing the effects of medications in older adults with stable angina. If you're not a member of the ARP crowd, or if you just went to a party last night and you feel you're not elderly and you might think you might not need to tune into the show, let me just attempt to correct you and say that you definitely probably know someone that's old. And if you don't know someone that's old, you may become old if you're blessed in 1 year, 2 years, or a few decades from now. So this show is focused on comparing the effects of medications in older adults with stable angina, and Dr. Michael Nana is with us to kind of explore that topic. But this is a show for everyone. So listen attunely. We're going to share some information. Dr. Nana is going to talk about the clinical trial, participation, the ramifications and the nuances. We're joined by Reverend Dr. Leroy O. Perry, pastor of St. Stephen's AME Zion Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program, and Reverend Alvin Clayton, pastor Walters Memorial AME Zion Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. Gentlemen, welcome. Dr. Nana, we're going to jump right in. I just wanted to mention that people have heard me say this more than once, and I will say it for as long as I have breath, that clinical trials are so essential developing the medications that you and us and your loved ones take every day. As I mentioned, the person this morning that I spoke with that going through proton therapy, that was as a result of clinical trials. And these trials are not possible without everyday people, every morning people, every afternoon people, every evening people signing up to participate in this really important research. Really looking forward to Dr. Nana sharing with us information about the Live Better research study and what we seek to learn in terms of the type of heart medications. We've heard this term, perhaps beta blockers or calcium channel blockers, but what kind of science and medicine is an art of discovery, and it's a passion of discovery. And we're really pleased to have Dr. Michael Nana here, assistant professor of internal medicine. As I mentioned, Reverend Dr. Leroy O. Perry and Reverend Alvin Clayton. Dr. Nana, kind of kick us off. You're a interventional person, cardiologist, and all these, often in the medical terminology it gets confusing, but you explore the heart. Let me you explore.
That's a good way to describe it.
You explore the heart in a very methodical, deliberate, and heartfelt way, to use that expression. But tell us about your focus on the care of older adults living with multiple chronic conditions in general, but then how did you even become interested in this area of interest? So good morning, and share with us if you would.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. This is a phenomenal opportunity for me to hopefully raise a little bit of awareness about heart disease, especially in older adults, and certainly to talk a little bit about the Live Better trial. It's a great question about how this became an area of interest for me. I think we can all relate to growing up with elders in our family that we really looked up to. For me, it was my grandparents who I admired, and I think in a lot of ways helped shape me as a person. I saw very clearly the sacrifices that they made so that we could have a better life. And I think that's true of a lot of families, something a lot of people can relate to. So I had this affection for older adults, even going into my medical training. And the thing that was really striking to me over and over again as I completed my residency and fellowship was that even though the majority of the patients that I was taking care of were in their 70s and 80s and beyond, the evidence underlying the treatments that I was delivering had mostly been generated in younger populations. So
Mm,
there was this extrapolation going on where I felt like the treatments we were giving people really weren't adequately tested in older folks, especially those living with multiple chronic conditions. So I
mm,
said to myself, I think we can do better. And I decided that I was going to try to focus my career on accomplishing that.
mm, mm. Tremendous, tremendous. Uh, just, I mean, that sense of passion and dedication that you mentioned is just so key in terms of your passion and your purpose and your product. Your product is survival and health and thrival. Talk to us a little bit, because we hear this term, um, heart disease, and sometimes people don't even pay attention. Sometimes we get overwhelmed with information. Uh, but it's an important topic, from my standpoint, and also about the prevalence. I'm concerned that people hear that one month is this particular celebration, another month is another celebration. I'm concerned people kind of just they get bombarded with information about heart disease and breast cancer and alcoholism, et cetera. But how prevalent is heart disease in this country? Is it a big problem, a manageable problem? And kind of tie that into why it's an important topic from your perspective.
Yeah, that's an important question. I think we've made some progress over the years in terms of developing treatments and procedures that can improve quality of life and survival in some cases. But heart disease remains the number one killer of adults in the United States.
Hmm.
Not to mention, it's also one of the major causes of disability, hospitalization. It presents a burden for both patients and caregivers alike. So I think there's no doubt that heart disease is something that we need to be aware of and really motivated to address. I'll say that, it's the leading cause of death in both men and women,
Hmm.
across most racial and ethnic groups. I think, the last statistics I saw from the CDC quoted that a person dies from heart disease in the United States every 33 seconds.
Hmm.
That's close to 700,000 deaths in the US every year. One in every 5 deaths in the US is due to heart disease. And around half of them are related to coronary artery disease, which is a subset underneath heart disease, meaning narrowing from plaque in one's arteries, one's heart arteries. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that heart disease is a huge burden on our country, and certainly something that should be at the forefront of all of our minds.
Thanks. And we're going to talk about the Live Better program and angina and throw around some words and interventions and how people can participate in studies. But I was just wondering, Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, just to kind of nail it on the head at the top of this show here, why this topic is so important for African American older adults. You guys have been pastoring and ministering and up in the mix with our community for so many decades, and just curious what your perceptions might be as we on Monday, June 26th, in 2023, about why this topic is so important for it pertaining to African American older adults. Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton.
Yes, Tom. I think that first of all, the statistics show that 350,000 African Americans die every year from sudden cardiac arrest,
Mhm.
and twice the number uh, to our white counterparts.
Mhm.
And I think that anyone who's doing a study is going to benefit this community in terms of enlightening all of us as to what can we do to help prevent this. And in order to do that, we need to understand it better. So I think
Mhm.
Dr. Nina's study is an awesome study
Mhm.
because it points to a particular part of our population that may have been overlooked.
Mhm.
And so I think that, it's groundbreaking. I'm glad to be a part of it. And I'm hoping that we can get the information out to this community so that we can be a part of this study.
Indeed. And just before we take the deep dive in terms of the Live Better trial, Reverend Clayton, any thoughts in this regard as well?
Well, Dr. Nana kind of hit the hammer on the head of the nail. But for our older brothers and sisters, it is even more critical because of some of the other issues that they may have. And Dr. Perry was also stating that we have to make them aware of what's going on, but we got to start so much younger.
Yes.
We have to make sure that people eat better, exercise better, worship the Lord better. All that's a part of this journey. And for our people of color, the numbers are staggering. So we got to make sure that we keep having shows like the Ficklin show and keep sharing with people every opportunity that we have to make people aware of the importance of this. I have a question. I don't know if it's too early to ask the question.
Please,
but,
as the spirit moves you, Reverend Clayton.
Like with medications, little children are not just small adults. The doses and things of that nature have to be modified and given to them at a certain rate because of their size and what have you. And I'm wondering that we need to make those type of changes for senior Americans and senior people.
And Dr. Nana, maybe we can weave in your answer to that question as we talk about the Live Better trial, because I know that's kind of there's a relationship there. So let me pass the mic to you in terms of the Live Better trial and kind of reference Reverend Clayton's question, and I think it kind of also pertains to the methodology that you're undertaking.
Yeah, I mean, I want to touch on Reverend Clayton's question first because I think it's very insightful. It's sort of part of the rationale behind the NIH's inclusion across the lifespan policy, which I hope we'll touch on a little bit later. But the basic tenet is that clinical studies are what inform clinical practice, meaning the treatments we deliver to patients are ultimately the treatments and the doses we choose because of hopefully the evidence that's been generated from clinical studies. So when a group of patients are underrepresented in clinical studies, as both older adults and African Americans have historically been, that means that the treatments and the doses that we're delivering haven't necessarily been tested like they should have been in those underrepresented populations. So to give you an example, of the more than 50,000 patients who participated in FDA-approved cardiovascular trials from 2015 to 2016, only 2.5% of the trial participants were African American. So it's absolutely essential that the studies we conduct going forward make a concerted effort to recruit individuals from these historically underrepresented groups so that we know what the right doses are, right? And it's even more important in cardiovascular disease studies because, again, older adults and African Americans are actually the patients at the highest risk. They have the highest prevalence of disease. So one could argue that these are precisely the groups who are the most important to enroll. So that's what I would say about that. I think, to dive into Live Better, Live Better is funded by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and our purpose is to generate better evidence for older adults living with stable angina or symptomatic stable coronary artery disease who need to be treated with what are called anti-anginal medications to help with their symptoms. And we know from previous studies that in general, it's best to treat this condition with medicines first before we go on to considering stents in the arteries. But what we don't know is what is the best medicine to start in older adults, especially those older adults who are living with multiple other chronic conditions. And beyond that, we certainly don't know what the best medicine is to improve the outcomes that matter most to older persons, things like quality of life, maintaining cognition, function, mobility, and independence. I love the word that Tom mentioned, thrival, right? And so that's what Livebetter is setting out to do, to determine which of the two medication classes of choice for this condition, beta blockers or calcium channel blockers, is the best medicine to start with.
And again, we have 40 minutes or so, Dr. Nana and Reverend Clayton, Reverend Perry, so we can take the deep dive. But Dr. Nana, just clarify, if you would, for me, for someone that's listening, are there any criteria in terms of who can participate or who cannot, inclusion or exclusion? Is there, are there any goalposts or
Yeah, of
guidelines
course.
there? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an important question. Like any clinical trial, there are inclusion and exclusion criteria. We're looking for individuals 75 years and above. That's sort of how we defined older adults, and that's based on the literature. And folks that are living with stable angina, or what we call symptomatic stable coronary artery disease, and that are not currently on a beta blocker or a calcium channel blocker. We want patients who should be started on anti-anginal by their clinician, but don't have a clear indication for one or another, meaning these are patients that the doc is planning to start one of these medicines, but there isn't a certain medication that really is clearly preferable for one reason or another. And there are different conditions that would make one or the other more preferable. In terms of exclusion criteria, we really tried to minimize the exclusion criteria because we want to enroll a representative population, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to enroll the patients that we're treating in the real world. So one important point is that because most of the follow-up for the study is over the phone, we do need patients who have access to a phone and are able to complete those phone interviews. But other than that, again, the exclusion criteria are really minimal because we're really trying to enroll that truly representative population of folks that we're taking care of on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent. And Reverend Perry, I know that lean when I see that lean on the shows. that leans. So go for it.
Yes, I was concerned about the fact that normally older African American men either have hypertension or some form of diabetes or some kind of heart problem, and if they're already taking medications for one or more of these comorbidities, would that make them ineligible for your study?
Yeah, so if the patient is already on a medicine and they've been on it and they're continuing to take it, they're ineligible. The reason being is that if we allow patients in that have already been on the medication, it introduces selection bias because we already know that the patient tolerates the medicine, that the medicine works for that individual patient. And so it removes the element of sort of randomization and keeping an unbiased approach. With that said, if a patient has been on the medication in the past and then came off for whatever reason, they would still be eligible. If the patient was recently started within the last 2 weeks on the medicine, we can take them off and re-randomize them to one or the other. And certainly, it's something that that we've run into. There are going to be patients that are on beta blockers and calcium channel blockers. They're two of the most common medicines that are prescribed. But in order to really get at clinical effectiveness of the medicines, we need to make sure that we're not taking a bunch of patients that are already on the medicines.
And Dr. Hanna, we're going to mention this several times throughout the show, but just share with people, if you would, even at this stage, how folks can find out more information, participate, talk to their grandfather or grandmother, or even themselves. But what's the way of contacting and learning more about possible participation in the clinical trial?
So thanks for bringing that up. That's a great question. My team gets mad at me for doing this, but I always tell people, just email me directly, which they tell me not to do, but my email is easy to find. It's michael.nana@yale.edu. I'm always eager to talk to people who are excited about the trial. I think the official way to get in touch is via our Yale email address. So that's livebetter-trial@yale.edu. So livebetter-trial at yale.edu. And then we have a wonderful website that's going to be up hopefully in the next month or two. And that's livebettertrial.com or livebettertrial.org. Both of those will work. And that's going to contain a ton of information relevant to the trial and how to ask questions. And I think will be a great resource for folks.
Tremendous. Dr. Nana, you mentioned angina. What is that? Some people will refer to it as angina, but I'm assuming angina is now the correct pronunciation. You live
either
live
one is fine.
But what are the symptoms and how's it diagnosed?
Yeah, so angina is the description we use for chest pain or discomfort that comes from the heart muscle not getting enough oxygen. And so while the symptoms of angina can often feel like pain in the chest, it can also present as squeezing in the chest, pressure, tightness, heaviness, burning. Some folks describe it as an ache. And we even see other symptoms such as shortness of breath with exertion is a very common one, jaw pain or arm pain that can present as what we describe as anginal equivalence, where instead of chest pain, the patient feels these other symptoms when the heart isn't getting enough oxygen. And then in terms of how we diagnose it, we generally start with a non-invasive test, whether it's a stress test or a coronary CAT scan of the heart arteries. And we can also do something more invasive, which is what I do on my clinical days, called a cardiac catheterization, if our suspicion is really high for a severe blockage.
Reverend Perry, I can see your brain cells moving once again.
Yes, no, I just find it so fascinating that when you talk about treatments and diagnosis, a number of elders or seniors, Black men in particular, have had these nuclear stress tests. They've had they've had mild angina, and so they have gone without treatment, but they're just being watched for a period of time by their cardiologist to see whether or not that is something that really needs find medication for. So in your study, though, it just seems like, you got an open market here. I'm trying to figure out how do we get into that market to attract 75-year-olds or their family members to come in or to have this discussion with you or your team. With their doctors, would they need a referral from their doctor, or can they just a family member who's concerned that dad has been showing some of these symptoms of angina? Could they are those the people that you're looking to be contacted by?
Absolutely. I mean, part of our study is about raising awareness, right? And hopefully, targeting health equity. And so if someone who's listening to this show has a family member or themselves is having chest discomfort and don't necessarily have a doctor that they can go to and see and talk to about that and get tested for it, please, we want to hear from folks. And certainly, I'm a cardiologist at Yale. That's my day job. So, if there are patients that need to be seen, we can make that happen. I think there's no doubt about that. And so, I definitely encourage folks with questions to reach out and you want to be vigilant about your symptoms, right? I think that there's a tendency to not want to bother your doctor and say, maybe this is just heartburn, or maybe this is because, I haven't been, getting outside as much. But if there's a concerning symptom that's different from what you're used to, it's never wrong to talk to your doctor. Let us figure it out. Let us decide whether it's something to worry about or not.
Reverend Clayton, I can also see your body language is a little different from Reverend Perry's, but I can also I have my mystical hat on this morning, so I can read people's minds, and I can see Reverend Clayton. You have a question also.
Yeah. Dr. Nana has somewhat answered my thoughts, but I have noticed that when people have angina, some of them think that it's not a serious matter, but from listening to the doctor this morning, it can be very serious.
Mhm.
So making the awareness of how important it is to at least have a conversation with your doctor is vital with this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like to tell patients, it's not your job to figure out whether you're having a heart attack. That's our job as your physician. And I emphasize that because lots of different symptoms can present in patients with a heart attack. And the last thing I ever want to do is tell a patient to ignore a symptom that might actually be something really serious. So, I think it's never wrong to talk to your doctor if you have concerns.
And Dr. Nan, I want to move to the asking you about the community advisory board, but before I do, it seems to me that I want to just throw in if there are any preventive steps, proactive steps for people that are listening, not that to prevent people from having to participate in your trial. What can we do to lower the risk of heart disease, if any? You hear a lot of these messages, and you see a lot of health fairs and people's recommendations. But from your standpoint, what can community members do to lower the risk of heart disease?
Yeah, that's a really important question as well. I would direct patients to something called Life's Essential 8, which is put out by the American Heart Association, which is meant to identify sort of easy, straightforward steps that we can all take to reduce our risk of heart disease and to live a healthier lifestyle. So, just to quickly review Life's Essential 8, it's to eat better. So aiming for sort of an overall healthy eating pattern that includes a balanced diet and whole foods and fruits and vegetables, lean protein, nuts and seeds, being more active. So minimum goal for exercise in a week is 150 minutes of moderate exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise. Certainly doing more is okay as well. Quitting tobacco products, which I generally will tell my patients, that's priority number one. Out of anything you can do, quitting smoking is really the most important in terms of reducing your risk. Something that gets ignored frequently is getting healthy sleep. So ideally 7 to 9 hours per night. Achieving a healthy body weight. So we have an obesity epidemic in the United States, and certainly maintaining a healthy weight is crucial. Controlling your cholesterol, managing your blood sugar, managing your blood pressure. So those are the essential 8. And I think if you can do those things, you can undoubtedly reduce your risk of having a heart attack or developing coronary disease.
I'm tempted, Dr. Nana, to ask you to repeat those again, but where can people, I mean, it's just, I'm just thinking, I'm trying to check off the ones that I've done. I'm really self-reflecting here, but so where is that information available, or what did you call it? It was
Yeah, it's called Life's Essential 8. It used to be Life's Simple 7. You may have heard of the Simple 7, and it got updated, I think, to include healthy sleep was the addition pretty recently. And that's put out by the American Heart Association.
Excellent.
Can I ask this? I need to ask a question.
Please.
Now, you're talking about healthy sleep. What about people who say they only need 3 or 4 hours?
It's a great question. I'm not sure that, and I'm not a sleep expert, but I'm not sure that we know the answer to that question, right? Is if someone has gone their whole life sleeping 5 hours and is fully refreshed on 5 hours of sleep and feel great and do great, is that unhealthy to do what your body needs? My suspicion is that it's healthy. It's fine. I think people know their bodies, and you sleep as much as you need. But I'm not sure what the data is around that. It's a great question. It's actually a good research question. Maybe that's our next research study.
Reverend Perry, you had mentioned just before we went on air, in terms of the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation and the cultural ambassadors, your connection with Duke, and Dr. Nana has spent some time in that Carolina area. What is the connection between the Yale, the cultural ambassadors? Because I want people to kind of really always be reminded that it's just not a local enterprise, that your tentacles are significant in terms of the cultural ambassador community outreach.
Yes, Tom. So when we in New Haven with the AME Zion Church collaborating with Yale, were informed of the great disparities in terms of the number of African Americans who had signed up for clinical research, we made a major effort to change those outcomes. And so in New Haven, when we were at 2 or 3%, we went as high as 12, then 20, then 40, then 60, and 80% in some studies. And to take it to a higher level, we decided to contact our AME Zion churches in North Carolina and partner with Duke. And so we went down and we did some training sessions with them. We brought them up to Yale to do some training here with them. And they started a group called Team or Heal. And that's what they do. They do the same thing that we're doing here in terms of recruiting, educating, and empowering minority populations to the need for being engaged in clinical research.
Excellent. Let's jump to the Community Advisory Board. I love the need for inclusion and just kind of rallying the troops and galvanizing the troops and just continue to kind of breathe new life into people's passion and interest. And I was really just excited to hear about Dr. Nana, you're deciding to create a community advisory board to help with this study design. Tell us, if you would, a little bit more about that. And Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, I want to ask you to join in on that as well.
Yeah, so stakeholder engagement is vital to the success of any clinical trial, to make sure that the research that you're doing reflects the priorities and the aims of the population you're trying to serve. And this is something that PCORI actually really emphasizes and prioritizes as well. There are different levels of stakeholder engagement in our trial and Livebetter. We have multiple ways for patients and caregivers to give feedback. One is with the patient advisory group that includes older adults living with heart disease and chronic conditions who can inform every aspect of the trial, from study design, the informed consent process, recruitment materials. So really everything about Livebetter to its core has been advised by our patient advisory group. We've also engaged with the community advisory board that you mentioned, and that's run through the program on aging here at Yale, which similarly is a group of older adults from the community who've been given the opportunity to give important feedback to different studies, and that includes the Livebetter trial. And they've been giving us important feedback basically from before we even secured the funding for the trial, when we were applying for the funding, all the way up to the present. And I also want to make sure I mention, we're hopefully looking to be able to form a diversity council if we can secure some additional funding from PCORI, made up of community leaders and representatives, our stakeholders, to specifically help us to enroll a diverse and representative population and hopefully improve health equity. So multiple layers to that, and obviously just a crucial part of the study.
Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton, just kind of amplify a little bit more, because that's so, it might sound routine, and people might say, oh, I've heard this before, but you got to lay the structure, the infrastructure, the communication structure on a sustained basis. This is just not a one-off. So I'm just curious what your thoughts were in this regard.
Tom, I want to say that I'm appreciative of the fact that Dr. Nana came to the cultural ambassadors, the YCCI cultural ambassadors, to get some insights from us with regards to the study. And 2 or 3 of the things that we mentioned to him was, number one, that we appreciated the fact that we're suspicious of studies that get started and then come back to the community and say, this is where we are, we want you to join us. Our priority is we want to be at the beginning of the study so that we can walk through this study with you. And if there are hiccups or if there are things that we think that are offensive or that may be detrimental to your study with regards to our population, we can tell you. Number 2, we did advise Dr. Nana that he needed to have a community advisory board. And we suggested that on that board there be members of our YCCI cultural ambassadors. And the reason we stressed that was We've been doing this for over 10 years.
Mhm.
We have an expertise here in terms of how you recruit, what your flyers should look like, what the messages should look like, and and it should be made up of people who have a knowledge about, who do this
Mhm.
all the time, and to have a faith group, a trusted part of the community working with you is just essential. And without it, I think that our studies, anyone who does a study without that is not thinking properly.
Excellent. Well, we definitely want to think properly and get up and each morning on the right, in our right mind. That's for sure. That's gentlemen. We have about 10 minutes or so. So as things kind of occur to you, this is such a fruitful discussion. I want to kind of get Dr. Nana, what we've discussed so far. What kind of comes to your mind? What would you like to share with folks, other than us contributing several $1 million to your research project?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be great.
That would be great. All right.
I want to echo what Dr. Perry just mentioned, and I think as researchers and as clinicians, and actually just more broadly in life, it's important to recognize your blind spots, right? And recognize where you can lean on the expertise of your partners and your collaborators. And I was incredibly fortunate to be at a place like Yale, where we have the cultural ambassadors group who have so much rich and robust expertise in this area, where, I don't need to be an expert necessarily in how to recruit a diverse population, because I have the experts here that I can just stop and listen to. And so that's really what I tried to do from the outset. Is I wasn't there to tell them how I wanted to recruit a diverse population for Livebetter. I was there to ask them, how do I recruit a diverse population and Livebetter, and listen? And I think all of researchers should really kind of take that to heart, because I think it creates a much more robust collaborative environment, and I think you end up with a much better product, and hopefully getting more patients of color into your study. And so I just want to thank Dr. Perry and Reverend Clayton, and honestly, a major shout out to them for other researchers at Yale. If you're committed to recruiting a diverse population in your study, reach out to YCCI and the cultural ambassadors, because it's been such a rich collaboration thus far, and hopefully more to come.
Definitely more to come. And Dr. Nana, I really want to thank you also for your transparency, your email address again, in terms of how people can reach you.
Yeah, it's just my first name dot last name at yale.edu. So michael.nana, it's NANNA at yale.edu. And I welcome people emailing me directly. That's totally fine.
Excellent. Reverend Clayton, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, sir.
Good. We share some of your pearls of wisdom. I really enjoy your thought process. It's just been, I don't get a chance to really say that to you as much as I would like. So I want to kind of publicly kind of declare my appreciation for your cognitive method.
Something has happened that I can't. You keep going in and out. I'm not sure if it's on my end or your end.
Okay. So
I think it's your end, Reverend, because everybody else seems to be very clear, and sometimes you're delayed. There's a delay sometimes when you're talking. So I think maybe a Wi-Fi issue.
We'll have to get that resolved. Dr. Nana, as we kind of wind up, I've heard this phrase, the inclusion across the lifespan policy, inclusion across the lifespan policy. Kind of break that down into terms of common speak, in terms of what that means, because my sense is, since I am AARP eligible plus 20, it sounds like something that might be of interest to me and to our listening audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to go over it. So the inclusion across the lifespan policy was implemented in 2019, I believe, and it was a recognition by the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, that federally funded research needed to prioritize the inclusion of subjects across the lifespan, specifically including both children and older adults in research studies going forward. And it's kind of in that same vein that we were talking about before. In order to know the effectiveness and safety of treatments in these groups, you need to test it in these groups. You need to enroll those patients. And I think the purpose of the inclusion across the lifespan policy was just that, to ensure that individuals are included in clinical research in a manner that's appropriate to the questions being asked, so that knowledge that's gained from these federally funded studies is applicable to the patients being researched and their diseases. And so I think this was an incredibly important step towards targeting enrollment of historically underrepresented populations, specifically older adults and children in clinical trials. And I think, also incredibly important to encourage studies to not exclude patients based solely on chronological age, which was something that was happening a lot up until recently. And really to include patients from across the aging spectrum, I think is super important. So it's a great policy.
As we kind of wind down, gentlemen, because we have another 10 minutes or so, I was just curious, Dr. Nana, you hear, my thought goes to my wife who has had a number of friends that have been hospitalized and going through treatments, and she's taken up on it as a personal mission where she'll go with them to the appointments and take notes, because that environment, if you don't have another person there to kind of translate or share, and just the angst and the anxiety of going to a doctor's appointment. But I'm trying to get to, most people have heard the term beta blockers and calcium channel blockers, and you get so bombarded with just the stress of life. But tell us a little bit about, if you could, the differences between beta blockers and calcium channel blockers.
Yeah, so beta blockers and calcium channel blockers are generally considered the two first-line classes of medications that are meant to be anti-anginals to treat symptoms related to stable angina. They work via different mechanisms, but the purpose of both of them are to improve what we call the oxygen supply-demand balance in the heart, meaning there's a demand for oxygen in the heart, there's the supply of oxygen to the heart, and you want that to be in balance. And when it's imbalanced, patients get symptoms. So both of these medicines work on that balance. Both classes of medicine carry their own advantages and disadvantages. And I think that's really the purpose of our trial, is to see which one works best in older adults, especially those with multiple chronic conditions. And I'll just point out, besides those two medicines, there are other anti-anginal medicines that folks can be on, nitrate medications, short-acting or long-acting. There's a medicine called ranolazine. And certainly for patients that are having ongoing symptoms, there are invasive options, as I mentioned before, heart artery stents that can open up the arteries to allow more blood flow, and even bypass surgery in patients that have very advanced disease. And the ultimate goal of all of these treatments is to help patients to feel better and live a better quality of life.
And for the study itself, is it a 7-year, 5-year? What's the lifespan, if you will, of the study at the moment?
Yeah, so we're going to be enrolling around for the next 3 years. Follow-up for the individual patients in the study is a year. And so, we're hoping after those 3 years of enrollment, we'll have enrolled a sufficient number of patients to answer the study question. And then there'll be some time where we're kind of getting the data together, cleaning the data, and then we'll be hopefully presenting results in the fall of, I believe, 2027.
Excellent. Reverend Perry.
I want to say also that, the cultural ambassadors almost 8 years ago came up with the idea that we need to have researchers come to where we are. That we should not, the problem has always been trying to go where they are. And that's been that broken bridge. And so getting the researchers to come to the community is an important thing. Secondly, compensating them for doing that, because people work, they got to go to work, they're going to miss time off, they have to deal with transportation, and some studies just don't even give a valid enough money to get an Uber car to get to where you are. So those are some of the things that we help researchers look at clearly when we are trying to help them. And thirdly, we ask them, what does your team look like? Do you have a diversity? You talking about diversity, and yet you don't hire people on your team that look like us or look like the people you're trying to help. So there are some major factors, I think, that we try to bring to all researchers, not to just this study, but to all studies, in order for them to be successful. Those are three of the ground fundamentals, I think, that we have to throw out. And when researchers pick up on those and follow those, I think we have better outcomes.
Yeah, that's such an important point. All three of those pillars. And I would say to the researchers out there, you may say, okay, well, I'm going to take time out of my Saturday. Well, I was at the Juneteenth celebration, I guess now 2 Saturdays ago on the 17th, and I learned way more from being at that celebration, and I got to enjoy myself way more than I could have ever expected, with everything that was going on and the dancers and the food. And so I think, put yourself out there as a researcher, take that advice from Dr. Perry and really get out into the community, and you'll find that your research will be more reflective of your community and that you'll learn a lot.
There is a question, Dr. Hannah, I would like to ask, and it's not, people should know that our shows are live, so they're not rehearsed at all. But let me kind of spit it out, if I will. A lot of Black people don't live to be 75. Is that your target, 75? Should it be 70? Talk to us about how that benchmark was reached in terms of this research project.
Yeah, so I mean, the cutoff of 75 is sort of the cutoff that's been used in a lot of the aging research, as sort of denoting when you define older adults. In some ways, any chronological age cutoff that you use is always a little bit arbitrary, right? If there was a way we could measure and quantify biological age, right? Physiological age, that would be more meaningful. That's the goal. When I retire, I hope we're there, right? So that rather than having an age cutoff that excludes patients that maybe have already kind of aged more, we could include those patients. But you make a good point, and you're right. Black individuals, especially Black men, many of them don't reach the age of 75. And that's why shows like this and studies like this are so important, because the onus is on us as clinicians to commit to changing that, right? It's a call to action. The time is now. We've described it for too long. There are too many studies describing that inequities exist. Now is the time to fix it.
I really appreciate your response. Could you have a 70 cutoff rather than 75? Is there a medical or epidemiological reason why you've chosen 75 rather than 70?
Yeah, again, it goes back to sort of what the literature describes as and uses as a cutoff. It's a good question, and I think as we're enrolling patients, if we find that of the patients we screen, the major barrier is that we're losing patients because of that cutoff, and there's a lot of patients sitting in that 70 to 74-year-old range that would otherwise be great candidates. There's always a possibility of an amendment to the protocol down the road.
Excellent. We have about 4.5 minutes, gentlemen. And so as the spirit moves you in terms of questions that you might have, Reverend Clayton, can you hear us okay now?
Yes, it has improved.
Great. Let's continue the improvement. Any questions, concerns, contributions you'd like to make as we kind of wind down?
Well, I think, Tom, one of the things that we've learned as ambassadors has been that you've almost got to know the weather you're flying in. And then sometimes the weather changes, and you've got to be able to change with that. So like when we talked about how during COVID, we had a project that dealt with senior citizens who did not know how to manage the internet or the web. And so they couldn't do telemedicine. They couldn't go to church. They couldn't communicate with family members. And so we brought a team from Yale in who met with seniors who were from 70 to 95 and taught them how to get a Facebook account and an email address and how they can look up their doctor and meet their doctor. So I say that knowing the weather you're flying in, we have to be adjustable to be able to look at a situation and see how we can better improve it. So one of the things that we're telling all of our researchers now is that, and I spoke to you about it, Tom, about all the health fairs that we have in New Haven. And you sent me a list of like 5 or 8 different health fairs that are annual. And I'm saying to these researchers, why don't you go there, set up a table, introduce yourself, and explain to the population that you're trying to reach why you're there and why you're doing this study.
Yes.
And those are the kind of innovative things that we work on almost every day. How can we do this better?
Yes.
And that's important to listen to what the people are saying. If they're saying why they're here and why aren't they coming to where we are, and they're in big magazines that don't even reach our community or websites that we never get a chance to look at because we don't have internet or Wi-Fi. So we got to figure out how to break some of these other disparities down to get this message equitably across to disproportionate minority populations.
Excellent. Reverend Perry, just as you're mentioning, then I'm going to shut up because we have about give everybody the last word. Tom, I'm an alder here in Ward 28, and Tommy Veal, City of New Haven, she's head of our, Dr. Hannah, she's head of our elderly services. And just as Reverend Perry was talking, I'm going to reach out to Tommy now and kind of connect her with you, because of the senior citizens centers might be another captive area. We meet, the Dixwell Senior Citizen, for example, meets on Wednesdays, and just the City of New Haven Elderly Services needs to know about this project. So Reverend Perry, thanks for lifting that up. Reverend Clayton, you're about to say something?
Yeah, we were at a health fair in New Haven last week. And one important aspect of this health fair was that all family members were present. So not only a person who had the need for a certain trial, but the husband or the wife, the son, the daughter, everyone can receive the information and made aware what's available to their family members. So that's another part of this thing that is great to help us keep making more and more people aware, especially the targeted group that you're trying to reach.
Absolutely. Dr. Nana, I'm going to give you the last word. We have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, so Reverend Clayton brings up something really important there, which has been honestly almost entirely absent from the cardiovascular disease literature. And that's, how do the treatments that we deliver impact not just patients, but also their caregivers? So that's something unique about Livebetter, is we're actually enrolling caregivers as well and looking at the impact of these therapies on caregiver burden. Patients don't need to have a caregiver to enroll, but certainly those that do, we're really encouraging them to join this study as well, something we're really excited about. And I just wanted to thank the Reverends and you, Tom, for having me on, and again, really encourage people to reach out if they have questions about the study.
Live better. That's the rule. That's the mantra. That's the prayer. And thank you for kind of being a sojourner, Dr. Nana. And we know that Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton have been sojourners from birth. So you guys are you guys have been on the battlefield, and you're still standing.
Oh, Lordy.
Absolutely. Praise the Lord. Harry, that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody. Be well, live better. Reach out to Dr. Hannah. He's a good soul, and we need to kind of wrap our arms around him and his trial. I normally talk until Harry plays the music, but he hasn't played the music yet, so I'm going to keep. There he goes. All right. Thank you, everybody. Take
As
care.
I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going. Better go in the right direction.